Luke, do you consider yourself to be a member of the illiberal left?
No, I don't, Michael, but apparently, because I thought the coup in Bolivia existed and it wasn't actually a coup, that yes, apparently I am, according to Yasha Monk. And what we are going to be discussing today is an article that he wrote in The Atlantic titled, "Trump is the best candidate for the illiberal left. If you hate wokeness, you should vote for Joe Biden."
Yeah.
Basically, it's making the point that Trump is so horrid, he is so disgusting, so out of place, that he proves woke people correct on so many points. It never defines what woke people is, I guess, yeah, just people who are left-wing.
Do you remember that term that was being thrown around, regressive leftist?
Yes, that went out of fashion.
Yeah, and now it's just completely gone. That was the other term. So that's the thing, they keep throwing these terms around, like, it used to be SJW, no one says that anymore. They had the whole cultural Marxism thing, regressive leftist. So much for tolerant left.
Cultural Marxism
kind of
is still going, actually. It's still going, cultural Marxism.
Oh, yeah. Okay, good. Well, I'm glad it is.
No, it is, yes. So basically the argument is that, Trump is so bad that getting rid of him would show woke people how ridiculous they are. It's not America or the Republican Party which is the issue. It's just Trump. Just to give a bit of background on Yasha Monk, he was an advisor to Tony Blair, I do believe. As mentioned, first off, he thought that what happened in Bolivia last year was great. Remember that? The coup?
Yes,
he had this great tweet, which was, this is a warning to dictators, from Evo Morales, who had, by the way, just won an election in Bolivia. He's somehow a dictator, to Viktor Orban in Hungary. Well, do you think there's any chance that Viktor Orban in Hungary is going to be overthrown by a CIA-backed coup? Any chance of that happening, Michael?
No, yes.
It's because he was a socialist. But anyway, we have to move into the actual article now. A number of influential commenters who firmly opposed Donald Trump in 2016 recently announced their intention to vote for him in 2020. Nearly all of them, including James Lindsay, Daniel Pletka, and Ben Shapiro, blamed illiberalism on the left. As Shapiro said on his popular show, he is planning to vote for Trump because, quote, Democrats have lost their fucking minds. Well, a bit of a potty mouth from Ben Shapiro there. The reason why they did this was because Shapiro and all the other grifters thought Trump would lose in 2016. They said, and we're not going to vote for him. He was a fad. He would go away. They didn't want to hitch themselves to Trump.
Well, also with Shapiro, I thought it was that a lot of Trump supporters were sending him a very overtly anti-Semitic abuse. But now the Democrats have lost their mind, so he supports Trump now. When he was getting messages about being put in a concentration camp, that was the rational right wing. But now the Democrats are saying things like, let's not shoot unarmed black people. They've lost their minds.
Yes, no, they have. They've completely lost their heads, haven't they? I think Shapiro and others were pissed at Trump for saying the quiet part loud, instead of being respectable. Yeah. The pretense is over now. The next GOP presidential nominee, if Trump does lose, everyone is going to try and emulate his drunk guy at the end of the bar act. But Yasha Monk is seeking to address this. Concerns about illiberal tendencies on the left are not made up out of thin air. Many Democratic politicians have not been as full-throated in their opposition to left-wing political violence as they should be. Parts of the left now seek far-reaching censorship in social media, advocate for employees to be fired for expressing conservative opinions, and are openly hostile to free speech. It references a Liz Warren proposal from January this year, which never gained any traction at all and has been completely forgotten about. He goes on to say, the likely future mayor of Portland, Oregon, has appeared to glorify mass murderers such as Che Guevara and Mao Zedong on the campaign trail. So basically this mayor of Portland wore a skirt had pictures of Mao Zedong and Che Guevara on it, and apparently, along with James Dean and Bob Marley, and a ninja as well. And
wait, hold a minute. Ninjas, Luke, ninjas have killed millions of people.
They have. And wearing this skirt apparently appear to glorify mass murder.
You heard of the Communist Party t-shirt, and it's got Karl Marx with a lampshade on his head and things like that, and it's like a joke. So it's that's just a common. And hold a minute. Wait, what? The Che Guevara shirt is the most common thing in the world. Everyone knows about the Che Guevara shirt. So if we're going to say you wear something with an image of Che Guevara or Mao Zedong, isn't it funny that literally just before we were talking about this, I was talking about how you get these people that are like, communists killed 100 million people. And, because capitalism hasn't killed anyone, Luke.
Apparently, you can't wear a skirt. If we switch this around, people like Yasha Monk would be saying, if someone on the left accused someone on the right of doing that, he'd say it's cancel culture, you're suppressing opinions, blah, blah, blah. But the fact that Trump presents a much greater danger to key constitutional values and does more than anyone else to lend apparent credibility to extreme forms of protest, as well as unremittingly negative appraisal of America. Voting for Trump to stem the rise of illiberalism is about as pure an example as cutting off your nose to spite your face. It's not systemic issues that are the problem, it's just that damn old Donald Trump. You know?
I also like the extreme forms of protest. What's extreme about it? Like, 'cause surely trashing things and like extreme forms of protest would be terrorism. If I was to say, okay, what's an extreme form of protest? You know, like the way that the Irish protested the British involvement in Northern Ireland, that was extreme. Ruining some property isn't that extreme. I would argue that's almost what protesting pretty much is most of the time. Shows how lame and vanilla these people are.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, basically, he's saying, you know, if Trump was the president, these protests would not have credibility either.
Even though some of these protests happened, like similar protests happened under Obama.
Yeah,
like the whole Michael Brown thing.
Well, apparently they were illegitimate. I guess that's the message.
Well, because a black person was president, so exactly. How could they have been angry?
So we'll skip along a bit. It talks about all the bad stuff Trump has done. You know he's against Trump. You know he doesn't like him. So many of the worrying tendencies on the left stem from two intellectual mistakes. The first is to focus so tightly on the country's flaws that its strengths become invisible and its institutions dispensable. What a horror that would be, criticising American institutions. I don't know why he says it's a mistake either.
See, the thing is, he calls it an intellectual mistake, which to me just feels like peak kind of rational liberalism. You know, it kind of feeds into the whole free marketplace of ideas and all that sort of stuff, where it's like, well, just intelligence itself is what's going to propel this system of government to be the best thing, the American liberal form of government. And that's the thing, I think we've used a term before, I can't remember when, of value-free governance, is this concept that a lot of liberals seem to have of it's like, it's not even about values, it's just about evidence and rationality and common sense. And obviously so he seems to be almost implying that to think America has flaws, you're just not being rational, Luke. You're not being a rational liberal.
That is true. Also, he goes on to say the second intellectual mistake is to believe that the right poses such an imminent danger that any form of resistance against it is justifiable, even if it involves violence. I think we can see from the summer we've just had, you know, the right wing and its institutions, you know, law enforcement poses absolutely no threat to left-wing people at all. So I completely agree 100%.
I mean, like, first of all, it should be pointed out, how are we defining violence? Because I would argue that there are some people who are literally saying,
milkshakes at people.
Like that's the thing, like, because obviously there is a genuine debate, I think, about to what extent actual physical violence is justifiable. Most left-wing people are not going to say, it's completely fine and is completely justified for Black Lives Matter protesters to be randomly attacking people and using indiscriminate acts of physical violence against others. That's not the position. The position is generally extreme forms of disruption and also attacks on property.
Yeah, and as we'll get onto later as well, the right does prove quite an imminent danger in other aspects as well, not just law enforcement. So continuing on, Trump, of course, disagrees with both of these mistakes, but because he is genuinely dangerous and extraordinarily polarizing, it makes it much harder for establishment institutions, as well as moderate voices on the left, to hold their ground against these fallacies. Again, this is the big issue that all of these guys like Yasha Monk have concerning Trump. He says the loud part quiet, and it's much harder to dissuade people from thinking that America has all these crippling problems when Donald Trump is the embodiment of so many of them. You know, from his personality to how he got into the White House via the Electoral College. A good analogy is he is unwittingly Donald Trump holding a black light. You know how people do to show how dirty hotel rooms are? Yeah, but of course he's doing that on a grand scale on America. And, you know, people like Yasha Monk, they can't have that. They need to get back to the days where people didn't really know about how actually crap these institutions are.
And the funny thing is, of course, that he says, like, Donald Trump, the issue is that he's, you know, polarizing, things like that. But the point is, if Donald Trump leaves, the 40% of people who were willing to support him, despite all the mental things he believed, aren't going away. Like, it's ridiculous. You can't, I mean, I know we've gone through this, and it's been said a million times, Trump is the symptom, not the cause. Basically, he shows how their presuppositions about America and about, I think, societies in general are just totally fallacious.
I agree. So he continues. The president has again and again incited racial tensions in the hopes of making partisan gains. If he wins re-election, the idea that racism not only shaped the country's past but continues to define its essence in the present will be much more difficult to refute. If, however, a clear majority of Americans turn on Trump, rejecting his racist remarks, those of us who still retain faith in America's perfectibility and seek to preserve its core institutions can more easily win the argument. And I read this and I'm like, oh my God, he just admitted it. This is what he's saying. If Trump wins yet again, how can we really say America is a good country and isn't systemically racist? How can we do it? Get that big, fat, orange, floppy-haired racist out of the way so we can go back to pretending how America has always sought to make itself a more equal and perfect nation. And once more, we can admire how respectable our institutions are, which are definitely not the tools of the powerful white majority in this country, and have been used to make things easier for that powerful white majority at the expense of normal Americans, particularly poor minorities. No, we can't be thinking those things, and Trump is making people think them. Get him out of the way, and it'll show, hey, guess what? Look at how good America is now. We've got Joe Biden.
I also like the kind of insincerity of this, because it says if he wins re-election, and that there was probably an article written exactly like this 4 years ago that says if Trump wins election, the idea that racism, shapes this country's present will become much more difficult to refute.
Yeah, he's already won once, hasn't he?
If in 4 years' time Trump wins the election, you're going to get another article like this being like, if we vote for Trump's new bill to make it so he can rule in perpetuity, then the idea that racism still defines America's presence will become much more difficult to refute. Like, I remember Samantha Bee said this after Brexit. She said, racism is not endemic to America. It's not native to America. And I say that, it's something that's been brought into this country. I don't know where she got this from, but it's something that's been brought into this country. And that's why when it comes to November 2016, we need to kick racism out and show that it will have no place in America. And that's the thing. It's going to be the same story indefinitely of despite anything that happens, they're going to continue to say, America isn't racist. But if this thing happens, then it might make it so people think America is racist. And they're never actually going to, they're never going to concede the point that maybe actually, once enough things have happened that might make people think America is racist, it might be time to consider the possibility that America is racist.
Yeah, if we take this, analogy quite simply, it's like a football match. Say, Man United lose 3-0 to Liverpool. And I'm like, this makes it so much harder for me to argue that Man United are better than Liverpool. Of course, what Samantha Bee said, that was so funny. Just so funny. An absolute classic. Just showing how, dumb liberal people were before 2016. But that's the thing, now, hopefully, Samantha Bee has had her eyes opened, because she genuinely would have believed that, as would millions of Americans. Maybe they genuinely now have their eyes open about how racist America is. But that's the thing, Yasha wants people's eyes to be closed once more.
Also, I like, what is a clear majority? Because I think we've established Trump has 40% of people, what Hillary Clinton 100% accurately called, the one correct thing Hillary Clinton ever said was even though it's such a lame way of wording it, the basket of deplorables. It's such a funny thing. And yet, he's got this 40% of people who will support him no matter what. And what term can he use to describe people who will support a complete racist? Definitely 100% of the time, apart from deplorable.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll continue on. A Biden victory would make it easier, not harder, to push back against Antifa types, just so many of them, aren't there, who think engaging in violent tactics to resist the Trump administration is justifiable. So long as citizens can contest political injustice at the ballot box, there can be no excuse for burning down government buildings. Oh, I fucking hate that so much. The government building he's referencing burning down is, I think, the Minneapolis Police Department. And, of course, the thing about Minneapolis, it was completely controlled by the Democrats. They had the governorship, they had the mayor of Minneapolis, they had the legislature in Minneapolis, and yet there was still this completely racist police force, which, discriminated against black people. If there's only two options, vote for the racist party or the even more racist fascist party, what choice do you have? You can't do anything at the ballot box. But anyway, but Trump's penchant for cruelty is the best possible recruitment tool for those who want to fight fire with even more fire. When the sense of terror that Trump has understandably instilled in many citizens begins to ebb, so too will the misguided hesitance of many Americans to criticize violent extremists pretending to fight for a noble cause. And
that's so much there.
Just great stuff.
I like fight fire with even more fire. Like fight racism with even more with even more race. No, even more burning down. like the term fire there. Like when you think about it, what does fire mean in that context? It's basically
authoritarianism. Yeah, that kind of stuff.
When the Nazis were burning down all those symbols of authority because they were such authoritarians.
That's
burning
the thing.
down police stations.
They burned down the Reichstag fire.
Yeah,
they burned down the Reichstag to show. Hey, look at this, look what's happening. Look, we need more authoritarianism. That was their excuse. And that's the thing. Trump has been looking for a Reichstag fire-like thing all summer, sending his supporters and police officers who are basically an extension of Make America Great Again, the Klan, I guess, to beat protesters. But of course, fighting back would not be a noble cause. It would be the wrong thing to do.
Yes.
And he acknowledges how awful the situation is with Trump, but his solution, I guess, is just to do nothing apart from vote. Just vote. And what if that doesn't work, like it doesn't in Minneapolis? Well, I guess democracy has won out then. You just got to get your 6 batons in your back now, since, you held up a sign saying Black Lives Matter or cops are pigs or whatever. That's democracy now. Just take your beating. I'm sorry. There's nothing you can do.
Yeah, well, I find it weird that it says pretending to fight for a noble cause, because it's kind of a very subtle shift of directions, because up until this point he's been saying, like, kind of almost, you'd say, presuming that the cause that Black Lives Matter is fighting for is justified, but they're going about it the wrong way. And yet here he's arguing that the violent extremists aren't even actually supporters of Black Lives Matter. So his argument, according to this, would be that the people who burned down that police station in Minneapolis, they're not even supporters of anything noble. And obviously I would assume if you asked him, because he's kind of a generic liberal, he'd say, it's noble to fight against racism. So you'd be like, okay, so you don't think those people there were even had the cause for being anti-racist? Like, that's the thing. And I think it's another example of liberals. They can't even admit that violent people and people who go outside of the parameters of what's considered acceptable in liberal politics can have good causes. I remember one time I spoke to someone who was, they said they weren't a feminist. I was like, why aren't you a feminist? And they literally said, because some feminists are terrorists. And I was like, so like, that's your argument. When Jeremy Corbyn said that the terrorism of the IRA brought Britain to the negotiating table, a perfectly reasonable thing to say. It's perfectly reasonable to say that the IRA's terrorism was what made Britain think, okay, we've got to go to the negotiating table. But you can't say that in a boring liberal society, because we have to say, no, terrorism could have never achieved anything. It's completely impossible that the IRA actually contributed to bringing peace by making it so the British government had to sit down and come to a solution. And that's the thing, we've got that position where we can't even say that violence can ever be for a good reason or achieve good ends, which is just lame.
Yeah, no, you are completely right. Absolutely. So anyway, in the next paragraph, he talks about how the country has actually moved to the left on many social issues because of Trump, which is actually true. Again, Trump has kind of exposed how awful the right-wing position is, and, sports now are so much more political than they were 4 years ago. You see a lot of Trump voters, what motivated them in 2016 was, they felt like the Liberals were winning, and that's because they were, and they needed somebody to fight back. They'd seen things like gay marriage be legalized, and that they weren't happy, and along comes Trump, and they voted for him. And now, well, look what's happened now in the running 4 years. All these things which they were complaining about being too political now have got even more political. When Kaepernick knelt 4 years ago, you couldn't have imagined like the response just this year from the NFL, the NBA, and I follow these leagues, so I know it's just so many more people getting involved in politics than they were.
I think it's funny because it almost shows how the Democrats are not progressive. Because if you look at it, under the Obama administration, you had lots of left-wing popular causes. And then under the Trump administration, you had even more left-wing popular causes. So it kind of shows how no matter what, you seem to get a rise in left-wing popular causes. It's just the Democrats, you get less of an extreme rise. And it's because no matter which party is in charge, you ultimately realize that they're just these center-right neoliberals. Basically, the Trump supporters were sat there like, oh man, it's under Obama, you had all these progressive things. You had this fight for Black Lives Matter. And the reality is, the people who started Black Lives Matter under the Obama administration weren't doing it because the Obama administration was emboldening Black Lives Matter supporters with their fierce anti-racist stance of the Obama administration. They were doing it because the Obama administration wasn't doing enough to curb systemic racism.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Definitely. So, he continues on, those who worry about illiberalism on the left should take this pattern to heart. According to commentators such as Shapiro, progressives already hold power in universities and the mainstream media, in Hollywood and Silicon Valley. If they also capture Congress and the White House, they would gain virtually unified control of American politics and culture. Okay, so first off, never start a point with, according to Ben Shapiro. But Shapiro is, of course, wrong. Yascha Mounk fails to mention that the Republicans have control of a vital aspect of America. And of course, we talked about law enforcement before, but they have probably the most important aspect in America right now, the judiciary. He wrote this on this was published, on the same day Amy Coney Barrett was confirmed in the Senate. Also, I like, by the way, how he's acting like Shapiro's saying this stuff in good faith. Like, he's genuinely concerned about illiberalism on the left and not just using it as a talking point so he can keep his grift going.
Yeah.
It's just, the insistence in making sure that these people are portrayed as good faith actors is so tiring. But anyway, he continues on in the final paragraph by saying, but fears of a Biden presidency leading to woke people taking over misunderstand the way public opinion moves in America. Yeah, I mean, it's not going to happen, but especially with Joe Biden. But anyway, because Trump's ample failings have given the most misguided claims to the far left a superficial veneer of plausibility, Trump himself has been the far left's biggest ally. And if the Biden administration does overreach on key cultural issues, that will likely set the stage for a course correction, a cascade back to moderation.
Course correction.
Okay, yeah, great. I want to know, by the way, what Yasha Monk thinks Biden could do that would overreach on key cultural issues. Like, does he think it's possible for Biden to ban the word Christmas? Like, I don't know if he thinks that Biden would do some absurd stuff, or rather, if Biden were to say, put the White House, in the pride flag colours, like Obama did, would that be a cultural overreach? Like, I don't know. It's a weird one. But anyway, yeah, I do want to focus on what he said concerning, once again, it's all Trump that is making the right wing in America look bad. For me, this is completely, and he did it earlier by saying the right does not pose an imminent danger, just completely ignorant, or perhaps deliberately ignorant, of the Republican Party and what a danger they are. In particular, it has been Mitch McConnell who has given, for people who actually follow politics, and apparently Yasha Monk does, or he should do, Mitch McConnell is the biggest reason as to why the quote-unquote left are accurate in their critique of America and the right wing. I mean, McConnell, for the last 10 years, has spearheaded GOP efforts and will continue to do so after, to just basically rewrite America's, political system. Just completely throw all precedent out the window. But even before that, if we look to the 2000 election, the GOP exploited several institutions. These hallowed institutions that Yasha Monk loves so much. The Senate, the Electoral College, the judiciary, to steal a presidential election. And now they've done it again, completely hypocritically, to ram through someone like Amy Coney Barrett to try and enact their right-wing rule over America via the courts to subvert democracy. That is as simple as it gets. Barrett was confirmed recently, by the way, and there was 52 senators who voted for her, and 48 who voted against her. The 52 senators that voted for her represented 14 million people less than the 48 who voted against her. But please tell me how great these American institutions are, once more. And it's all down to Donald Trump, who making them look bad.
And also, obviously it says that Trump's been the far left's biggest ally. You and I both spoke about should the progressives want Trump to win, and our answer was no. So I think he doesn't seem to think that the far left, or the progressives, I think is a more appropriate term, actually want to achieve anything, because he's acting as if, the progressive far left
it's just all about winning an argument rather than actually enacting change.
But obviously the reality is that, we've said that we want, and plenty of other kind of progressive, even, Marxist people, even Noam Chomsky, for example, and I know he's not a Marxist, but similar vein, have come out and said that, no, we need to vote for Biden because as terrible as Biden is, he's better than Trump. And then obviously, there's that term of superficial veneer of plausibility. I always like the fact it's 3 words of removing it from reality. It's it's plausible. So it's not definite, it's plausible. It's a veneer. And it's superficial. And then also these are misguided claims. And you just think he's so trying so hard to kind of use the language to manufacture this notion that this is ridiculous. And obviously
doesn't use any evidence, by the way, throughout the article as to why these claims are superficial or veneer or whatever. He's got claims to show that how the left is going to destroy social media and all of that. But absolutely nothing as to why these claims are superficial, by the way.
No, it's incredibly, because that's the thing, there were actually hyperlinks to other articles and things to evidence his claim for the beginning, and then suddenly it just falls apart. It just starts, which is okay. It's apparently written just for people who read the first paragraph of articles. But that's the thing. Obviously, the far left, fun fact, don't argue, and again, I'm using the term far left, take it for whatever it means, because to be honest, it's not really a far left thing, but, the far left doesn't argue based on Trump. That whole orange man bad thing, whatever about it. But certainly the far left position has not just been, Trump. The far left position has been a criticism of meaningful aspects of how America has been established, and also plenty of America's institutions. And,
but that's the thing, Yasha Monk doesn't even look at those people. Yes. He thinks Elizabeth Warren or Kamala Harris qualify as the far left. That's the thing. And that's what that group of, senators represent and their supporters are like orange man bad for a lot of things.
That makes sense.
But even the people, Bernie Sanders supporters, they're not even like acknowledged at all, and their critiques aren't even acknowledged. I think that is definitely the case.
I think the only thing to point out is that, and this is a criticism of Ben Shapiro too, this idea of the left and this whole notion of regressive left, the main issue of it is it's far too simplistic and it's just dividing people up into groups. Like the number of times where I've spoken to some kind of vaguely right-wing person and made some concessions because I am a reasonable person who can admit there are some areas, like, even something like immigration. I've said, yeah, sure, there should be a sensible policy in terms of making sure immigration isn't destructive to the importing country. And they've gone, oh, so you're reasonable. You're not like those people who believe in the wage gap. Like they'll mention something else, but well, no, I believe in that. So the thing is, they have this idea that there's like all people who they disagree with, who they've got the idea of the reasonable left, which is basically, Dave Rubin. And then they think every other person who's any other kind of category, whatever it is all one big group, and it's just nonsense. And that's what this guy has here. He's just, slamming all of these people together, whether it's Black Lives Matter supporters, Bernie Sanders supporters, orange man bad people, and it's just ridiculous.
Well, it's the same thing that Republicans and right-wing people do. They're just like, they don't really understand the differences on, I guess, the left wing or centre-left of America. They just put them all together.
Oh, holy shit, Luke. I mean, the sentence which I think encapsulates that, the phrase which I think encapsulates that most, is postmodern Marxism. It's like the worst phrase, because postmodernism is the idea that there are no meaningful systems for, establishing truth and identity and reality and things like that. That's what postmodernism is. Postmodernism is the idea of criticizing certainty and criticizing the rigid structure of systems. While Marxism is literally the belief that the entirety of oppression is based in material reality. Like postmodernism and Marxism are completely contradictory ideas, where one is literally based in the idea that oppression is rooted in material reality, and the other idea is based in the idea that there is no material reality and everything's kind of, up for scrutiny and things like that. Conservatives, because they have no idea what they're talking about, use the terms as if they're completely interchangeable, and it just is, I think, the best example of how little they know and how it's just buzzwords for them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is the thing. Just to cap it all off, we had yesterday Brett Kavanaugh, again, who was confirmed by the Senate GOP, all of them, I think. He, a couple of days ago, endorsed Supreme Court Justice Rehnquist's concurrence in the Bush v. Gore debate, or ruling, I should say, not debate. And this concurrence by Rehnquist didn't get majority support at the time, even from the conservative justices, and it was like the most radical part of the decision. If you want to read more about it, you can, but basically it was just some crazy thing to justify why Bush should win the presidency that year. And Kavanaugh endorsed this a week before the election, because of course, we're just several days away from November the 3rd. And yeah, really, this is a clear indication that the whole GOP, the judiciary bench, like the Republicans in the Senate, are gearing up to steal this election. And Biden may win by too big a margin for them to do anything about that. But if they have a chance, they will absolutely give it a shot. No doubt about it. We saw it in 2000. And if we look long term as well, we have Senator Mike Lee of Utah doing a very revealing tweet, I will say, where he said, "Democracy isn't the objective. Liberty, peace, and prosperity are. We want the human condition to flourish. Rank democracy can thwart that." He wrote, misspelling prosperity. So this is the thing. This is an important US senator, not Trump, saying democracy is not what Republicans want. And again, I think this has been the case since around 2012, but he's just being honest about it. And again, Trump, because he's Trump, said the loud part quiet. I remember he said when he was doing an interview with Fox News, in referencing Democrats trying to make it easy for people to vote. This was in March. He said, so basically it was the COVID-19 bill. Things they had in there were crazy. They had levels of voting that if you ever agreed to it, you'd never have a Republican elected in this country again. Trump said in an appearance on Fox and Friends. They had things in there about election days and what you do and all sorts of clawbacks. They had things that were just totally crazy and had nothing to do with workers that lost their jobs. So that was what Democrats tried to instill in the bill. And again, it was a bit of opportunism because, no doubt about it, the things weren't that connected, but Trump just comes out and blurts it. Like, oh yeah, a lot of people vote, the Republicans lose. And they acknowledge that. And here's the thing, of course, Yasha Monk, I imagine, this is why he wants to get rid of Trump, and other respectable right-wingers as well do too. He exposes, Trump does, the awful true nature of the Republican Party and therefore America too. And he may think that, Trump proves the woke right, and that's why if you are Ben Shapiro, you got to get rid of him. But in actual fact, the Republican Party, the whole party, not just Trump, prove the woke or the illiberal left or whatever names he wants to throw at them. They prove those people right every day by their actions, and will continue to do so in the future. Like you said before, Michael, Trump is not the cause; he is just a symptom.
Yes, yeah, and that's really what it comes down to, basically.
Well, I'm glad we agree then, Michael.
Yes.
I'm glad we